This is Radiant Voices Media.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Transparently Jordan podcast. Today's episode is all about mindset, the kind of deep inner work that helps you heal, move through fear, and rebuild self-trust when life feels so uncertain. I'm joined by Cosmina, a mindset coach who helps people break free from self-doubt, reframe failure, and step into their power with more clarity and confidence. In this conversation, we're diving into what healing actually looks like, how to tell the difference between fear and intuition, and why failure can be one of the most valuable teachers you'll ever have. If you've ever felt stuck, questioned your worth, or struggled to quiet that inner critique, this one's for you. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hey there, and welcome to the Transparently Jordan podcast, where I'll be talking with a new guest each week, and we'll be covering topics in health, fitness, lifestyle, and so much more. So stick around and let's get into today's episode. Hey everyone, Jordan here. If you're like me, always pushing for that next level in training, recovery, and overall wellness, then you know the right fuel makes all the difference. That's why I'm excited to share my go-to for clean, powerful nutrition, Tropika. Tropika's range of certified organic supplements is packed with high-quality ingredients designed to fuel your body and elevate your performance. Whether you need a protein boost post-workout, an energy kick to get you through the day, or gut-loving superfoods to keep you feeling your best, Tropika has you covered. I personally love their lean protein because it helps my recovery without the heavy bloating feeling I get from these other proteins that I've had in the past. Plus, everything is free from artificial nasties, so I know exactly what I'm putting in my body. If you're ready to take your health and performance to the next level, check out Tropika today at tropika.com.au. And because I love hooking up all of my listeners, use code JORDSDAY10 for a special discount at checkout. That's JORDZDAY10 at checkout for a special discount. Fuel your body and power your life. Tropika has your back. Thanks, you all. Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on and taking the time. But maybe to get started, to the person that's listening, do you mind just introducing yourself and let the person know a little bit about you?
Yes. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Cosmina Naum, and I am an intuitive mindset coach. I've been doing this work for about 10 years, and it's very much informed by my 10 years of clinical practice, but also my lived experience as well.
Amazing. Well, I think like the reason why I wanted to have you on was because I've seen a few of your posts on Instagram, of course. And I think like this whole like life coach, but also like healing, self-doubt, like we all want to be better, right? And I know like the listener listening in right now is the person that wants to be better, to improve, and to kind of move forward. So I thought you would be a perfect person to kind of have on the podcast. But maybe if you don't mind just getting started by telling us about healing. And I think like there's this notion that, you know, we all want to heal. We all want to kind of be better. And I think we all might have a trauma or something in our past that we want to get over. What's the first step that we can kind of start that healing journey in that process?
Yes. So I think we were all born whole and worthy. So if we start at the very beginning, we were all born authentic and we are inherently worthy, right? So I think a lot of our issues come from feeling like our self-worth is very conditional on how we perform and what we do and our output, our productivity, those sorts of things. So what happens through life is that we were born authentic. If you think of yourself as a child, you're free, you're playful, you're free-spirited, you're happy in the moment most of the time when you're very, very young. And then what happens is that through life we get taught that in order to fit in order to be safe, we have to shrink parts of ourselves or change ourselves in order to belong effectively and to maintain that connection with our primary caregivers. And so through that experience, we develop certain coping strategies that are very effective when we're very young, but they become less effective when we're older. And also through those life experiences that are very different person to person, we develop certain core beliefs around who we are as people and our worth and those sorts of things. And then that shapes our behavior.
I think that's so interesting because like it all like if you think back to exactly what you were saying, like as kids, we're so confident, we do whatever we want and, we say whatever we want and, act however we want. But then like you were saying, like just through, I guess, learned experiences, things change. And, like me, for example, I'm a quite quiet and reserved person. And that's probably like with me trying to reflect over my past, it's probably something that I've learned, as a kid or growing up. So I think it's always, or there might be somebody listening right now that is going through something and I think like kind of trying to work out why this is. So that's a great explanation there. But how do we, I guess, recognize what we've kind of gone through and recognize, what needs to be healed? Are there any strategies that people can kind of go through?
Absolutely. So I think a really big thing, if I think of a lot of clients that come to see me, they want their pain to go away. So that's a really common thing. As human beings, we don't like feeling pain, emotional pain in particular. But it's first of all recognizing that every emotion that we have, that we experience, is actually there for a purpose. And it's a really important sign. It's communicating with us. So for example, anger is actually very helpful because it can help us, fuel us to set boundaries. If someone's mistreating us, for example, fear keeps us safe and is seeking, effective protection and reassurance. Sadness is also trying to communicate something for connection. So all of these things are really important. But it's looking at patterns, like I guess maladaptive patterns that we get into with our behavior that are causing us issues day to day. So things like self-sabotage, procrastination, those self-worth blocks and feeling like you want that job but you're not going for it, for example, that lack of confidence.
Why, like, I quite like the whole self-worth and self-doubt and those few points that you made, but like, why do you think we as people go through self-doubt at a lot of times? Because I think like sometimes too, like, in my experience, a lot of things that have come up on the podcast in the past is, people always having, let's say, a fear of starting something or a fear of failure, this and that leads into self-doubt or whatnot. But like, why, like, of course these feelings are important, but how do we get around, I guess, self-doubt and fear, and how do we stop letting those things hinder us?
Yeah, so if we even go backwards, understanding why the brain actually works in that way, our brain is very much wired for survival, not for thriving. And so we have a loss aversion, a focus on loss aversion and a negativity bias, as opposed to focusing on, I guess, abundance and opportunities as much. So our brain very much is wired to keep us alive. So think about cavemen, for example. If they stopped and smelled the roses, they were likely to possibly get eaten by a tiger or something like that. So our brain very much prioritizes negative information that is tied to our survival. But of course, now we're not being chased by tigers anymore. We're mostly safe most of the time. And so we don't actually need to, our brain doesn't need to just prioritize negative information. But it's still just evolved to do that. So I guess it's first of all picking out the thoughts. So working out what thoughts are driving your behavior, because what we know is that our thoughts shape our emotions and also influence our emotions and also our behavior as well. So it's trying to, I guess, pay attention to our thinking and work out when we're getting stuck and hooked on a negative thought, and then stepping back from that and questioning, well, is that helpful for me? Is that actually the truth? And I guess training our brains through neuroplasticity, because we know that our brain is very plastic and incredibly changeable until the day we die. So we know that from research. So being able to, I guess, pick up on that limiting belief or that thought, that negativity, and then reframing it into something that's more aligned with our values and our goals.
how do we because some people like myself, I think I've tried and I am still going through that whole journey of improving. And I think like you were saying, recognizing when we might be fearful or recognizing when I might be self-doubting myself and trying to revamp that. But I think some people are very negative a lot of the times, and I don't know why that reason is. I used to think it's just because some people were that way. But how people out there and to the listener listening right now, if they are experiencing repeated thoughts of self-doubt, what are some exercises or some ways or strategies that they can kind of catch those thoughts? Because I think it's easier said than done, isn't it? I don't know, any tools until I've practiced, through Google or whatever. But what are some easy strategies that people can implement maybe today?
Yeah, so a really helpful strategy is a thing called if you catch the thought. So for me, what I find most helpful, and I think we're very different in this way, but for me personally, I notice the emotion first before the actual thought, if that makes sense. So I'll notice a drop in my mood, for example. I might notice anxiety coming up. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to acknowledge that's occurred. Name the emotion if you can. Is it sadness? Is it anxiety? Is it anger? Whatever it might be. And then stop and work out where you feel that in your body. So is it, pressure on your chest? Is it your heart rate increasing? Is it tightness in your throat, for example? Tense, if your muscles are very tense. So picking up on that sort of stuff, creating a little bit of space for that emotion in your body, and then going backwards and thinking, hang on, what thought just hooked me right there? And once you have that thought, then you can, so you've caught the thought, then you can check if the thought is actually evidence-based. If you look at the evidence for and against, how true is this thought? If I was talking to my best friend or someone I cared about and they had this thought, how would I respond to that person? And then changing it, so reframing it. And the really beautiful thing about that is that we know that if we have limiting beliefs, so beliefs that are effectively negative or holding us back from the life that we want to live, if we are able to reframe those beliefs through that process, the affirmative belief actually carries a lot more weight. And that's because we've taken a conscious effort to create that alternative thought, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's the process in a nutshell.
Yeah. To people out there, I think a common thing that you hear maybe on social media or whatever is if you're anxious about something or if you have self-doubts or whatever, like you were saying, we have elasticity in our brains and whatnot. But is there truth behind the people out there that are saying if you're anxious about, let's say, public speaking, then you just have to go and put yourself in that scenario 10 times? Because to me, I'm super anxious about large groups of people, and even the thought of doing that once is no, I'm never gonna put myself in. I don't even know why I would need to put myself in that scenario. You know what I mean? Is there any truth behind putting yourself in scenarios like that repeatedly, or is that a hoax?
It's 100% true. So it's a exposure therapy,
Right,
effectively.
okay. Yeah.
Because that's the only way to get that evidence that limiting belief is not necessarily correct.
Right.
But also it's about nervous system regulation. So like I was saying, you get that anxiety that comes up. So you go into a fight and flight state. And when you're in that fight and flight state, when you're public speaking or even thinking about it, the front part of the brain is actually not operating in the way that it should. And that's the part that's responsible for your logical thinking, if that makes sense. So what's happening when you're in fight and flight, you're effectively the emotional parts of the brain are actually running the system. The limbic system, for example, they're running the whole show. But this is very primitive, again, based on caveman days. So we know that if we're public speaking, absolutely, if we carry a lot of shame and fear, it can be terrifying, but we are safe. So the first step is actually calming down your nervous system in that moment so that your body then associates public speaking with safety and not with that fear response.
Hey everyone, I want to tell you about a brand called Reed, the sunglasses made by runners for runners. Born in Sydney, Reed was built with one goal in mind, to create sunnies that actually keep up with you. Whether you're hitting a sunrise tempo session or grinding through a weekend-long run, Reed delivers crystal clear lens tech, lightweight frames, and durability that doesn't quit, no matter how many times you swept through them or stuffed them in your bag. They offer a range of lens shades and technology to suit all conditions, from bright road races to shaded trails. There's no slipping, no bouncing, just solid performance and style. So if you're tired of sunglasses that can't go the distance, it's time to rethink your eyewear. Check them out at reyourrun.com.au and use code Jordan10 for a little something off your first pair. That's code Jordan10 to save yourself 10% off your first pair. Those that feeling of being anxious and like the butterflies in your stomach and that kind of stuff, are there any strategies to maybe ease into that? Like if somebody, I think for me, again, if we're to stick on the topic of public speaking, for example, if somebody were to ask me tomorrow, Jordan, come and present on how to start a podcast or whatever, and there's going to be even 10 people, to me is like a lot. You know what I mean? Are there any tips for people to ease their way into, how to get over those anxiety or those high stressful scenarios? Because again, I don't know, to me, it just putting myself in that position even once, I understand absolutely the more you do it, the better you're going to feel. But even to just put myself in that scenario once, I think to the person listening right now or anybody, it could be a high anxious kind of scenario.
Oh, 100%. I think it's one of the most common fears. Also a fear that I've had my whole life, to be honest. And then often you get up there and your body goes into this fight and flight state. And for me, I would speak very quickly, or I would have almost no air in my lungs is how it felt. And so that makes you even more anxious. That kind of feeds that anxiety. So I think the first thing is we'll go back a few steps. So the first thing is working out why would you want to change that? So looking at your values as a person, why is it important for you to public speak? So once you work that out and you're like, you know what, actually it's really aligned with my goals. I want to step into that person. I want to do that more because one, I think I'd enjoy it, but I don't know.
You can help more people.
You can help more people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So once you work that out, then you can go a step further and be like, okay, well, what's actually getting in my way? Then you can start to, so you've got the goal, I want to public speak. Then you can start to write a list of all of your limiting beliefs. What are all the reasons why this is absolutely terrifying for me? Then you can pick your top limiting belief and start to change it and reframe it and come up with an affirmative belief, for example. The next step is to actually, again, relax your nervous system before you go up and when you're thinking about it. So you can use things like visualization, which is incredibly effective to calm your nervous system to, pretend that you're public speaking, imagine that you're up there and calm yourself down with deep breathing, which is our body's greatest physiological regulators, especially if you take in a very deep breath, hold it, and you ensure that your out breath is longer because that actually slows down your heart rate. And then you can keep practicing that over and over again. But ultimately, you're going to have to do it in real life and it's going to be scary. But you're only healing through the pain and through that fear. If you avoid it, you're only reinforcing the fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that point that you made, the early steps, what's holding you back, I think for me, if I think about staying on the topic of public speaking, what's holding me back, what's the worst that could happen? You know what I mean? I'm not going to die or anything like that. I think what's holding you back is probably a really good tool for people to use because it's so simple, putting down 3 points on what's holding you back. And I think, again, if we go back to this negative mindset, even if all 3 of those points, they are going to be negative, at least then you can strategize on how to flip those things. So I really like that tip there. But another, I guess, common theme that's come up on the podcast, I think self-doubt, but high achievers. I think sometimes high achievers always have this whether it's early on or through their career, have this self-doubt. And it almost seems like high achievers have more self-doubt than other people. Why do you think that is? Why do high achievers often have this kind of theme of self-doubt, basically?
So many different reasons. I think one is unrelenting standards. We hold ourselves to very, very high and unrealistic standards often. But also it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. But what it is like the more you know what you don't know. And the opposite is also true. If you don't know much, then you don't know what you're missing out. You don't know what you don't know. And so then you feel more confident. So I would say that if you actually have that imposter syndrome and you're questioning yourself and doubting yourself, like congratulations, it's actually a really good sign. It's also a sign that you're actually, that's a reframe, I guess, but it's also a sign that you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, which is what we want to be doing always. We're constantly striving for greatness. And then it's, of course, goes back to looking at your thinking and is it fair? Is it balanced? Would you hold your friend to the same standard or your colleague to the same standard and questioning that? And why is it so important that you're perfect? Right? We should really embrace imperfection because that's just being human.
Yeah. What about like coping mechanisms? Because I think like if I think back to the areas in my life where I've had doubts about myself or whatever, like I think like if you're putting yourself maybe in a new situation or you want to start something, like sometimes a coping mechanism could be like procrastination or like, just finding ways to further doubt yourself and not get something started. So how do we, I guess, combat these coping mechanisms with self-doubt so that somebody can actually get over this fear of maybe starting something, for example?
Yeah, I think the first thing is also giving it a go and just like that reframe around, I guess, is you have to kind of do it and then things get easier with time. You get that momentum. And again, you're getting that evidence to contradict your fears.
Right.
The other thing, and it's a concept that's very well researched, is a self-compassion. So again, speaking to yourself like you would to someone that you care about in a more caring and compassionate way, because we all have this inbuilt inner critic. And this inner critic, this internal, it's us, of course. It's not separate to us. It's a part of us that puts us down. And this is something we reinforce through childhood. It might be parents being really hard on us, even if they're very well-meaning. That can happen. It could be teachers, other friends even that are putting us down if we're being bullied, for example. So it's starting to work out, okay, what's my inner critic? And what's the healthier part of me? What does that part have to say? So it's being able to, again, catch it and examine it.
Right. When we talk about fear, I think sometimes it can get mixed up with maybe like intuition. Like I think sometimes fear is important when I guess we're wise. My question is, what's the difference between fear and intuition when it comes to like, if we stay on the same topic of let's say starting something or maybe meeting a new person or whatever it might be, what's the difference there and how do we differentiate like when a decision we need to make is actually smart versus like it being fearful?
That's such a good question. I think it's quite hard to work it out because we're so used to feeling that fear and then really listening to it. So when that fear, again, it's such an intense feeling in our bodies, it really drowns out our intuition. So the fear comes from that limbic system, the part of the brain the emotional part of the brain, effectively, that's wired for survival. So it's remembering that. So it's a sense of real urgency, and you get all of that adrenaline and cortisol that's rushing through your body. So that's how fear often feels. Intuition is very calm. And it's a lot more certain, and it comes from a much more grounded place as well. So it's about being able to work out what the difference is between those two and how that shows up in your body as well. And that comes with practice, but also through things like meditation. And if you feel a lot calmer in your nervous system, because obviously if you're in a rest and digest state, not a fight and flight reaction, in that rest and digest, you actually have the ability to, again, to think rationally and to be much calmer in your body and then actually hear what your intuition is trying to communicate.
So like practically, if somebody wants to be more calm and like, wants to use, let's say, meditation, for example, is there a time frame that people need to expect, like to practice, let's say, meditation or practice these skills before it can regulate, your nervous system or whatever? Or how long does it take? Because I think like that's a hard answer, I know, because sometimes it's different for everything. But I think like we live in a world where everybody wants a solution now, really. And that's not always a realistic expectation or a realistic goal. So how long should people expect to take to, I guess, go on this journey of self-improvement or practicing, these tools that they need to do to get themselves better?
Yeah, so it's, how long's a piece of string? So like that's the thing. It's so hard to answer because it depends on everybody and I guess our life experiences as well. And if we've done it before, if we're completely new to it. So for some people, even doing deep breathing can be quite an anxiety provoking exercise. So it's about really breaking it down. And you might start with very basic grounding strategies. Like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, putting your feet in the grass, being outdoors. You might start with that before you go into meditation, for example. So really building it up very gradually and then paying attention to what's going on in your body because there's no pressure. And I don't think we ever get to a point where we're fixed, if that makes sense. We're always going to be triggered because we're human beings. We have emotions and we can't switch them off. And I think a lot of our problems as human beings come from wanting to avoid and wanting to, like you say, like fix things as quickly as possible. So it's really honoring the process and going very, very slow or possibly even seeking professional help.
Yeah, for sure. I think like that's a very common, like I liked your whole example of like us wanting to avoid or go down that stream. Cause I think like a lot of the times, I guess when we go back and talk about procrastination or whatever, like it's sometimes easier to avoid something than it is to like do the work a lot of the times or to kind of get over. And I guess it goes back to fear, like, it's scary to change or it's scary to kind of face these things that, are basically shaped our identity in a way. But like how does somebody, I guess, detach something from their identity? So like for example, like I grew up and I was bullied and I don't necessarily feel like that's part of my identity, but some people might associate, I was the bullied kid and like this is why I behave the way I am. Like how do we detach these things that have happened to us in the past from our identity so that we don't kind of let them shape our mindset, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it comes back down to working out what your authentic essence is as a human being beyond that. So when you're a child, before you had those experiences, what games did you like to play? What were you like? Because again, we often abandon some of these things through life as well. So it's working out who you are authentically, your authentic essence, what gives your life meaning and purpose, and your values. Our values are like our compass in life or our direction. So coming back down to that would be the first step. And then being able to work out what part is communicating. Is it the inner critic putting you down, or is it actually a healthy part of you, a kind and compassionate part of you? So being able to question yourself. But yeah, these are all very, I guess, gradual processes.
And it sounds like a lot of those things are kind of, I guess now might be in like our subconscious mind in a sense, like embedded within us somehow, I guess through exposure or whatever. So how do these beliefs and these subconscious like ideas that we have behind us, how do we kind of get over, I guess, those kind of things? Because like, again, it's easier said than done. And I think like, you've mentioned some great tips in the past about like some like key things to work towards. But I think like when we don't know what we need to like focus on, because it's again part of our subconscious mind, that makes it even harder to kind of get over and to kind of write down things, right? So like how do we, I guess, realize what subconscious and what our true, I guess, self is?
That is really hard. I mean, it's a process. So first of all, we have thousands of thoughts going through our mind all the time, and they're not always in our conscious awareness. So it's actually the core belief that's hardwired into the brain, not so much the thoughts that you have every day, if that makes sense. So in order to go a little bit deeper, and I would do this with professional help from a trained, registered professional, but you might pick up on a particular trigger. So again, you might notice that anxiety comes up when you're thinking about public speaking. You're like, I could never do that, for example. And you might even get feelings of shame and feeling not good enough about yourself. So at that point, really tuning into that feeling, again, where you feel it in your body, allowing it to be there without having to change it. And then going back and thinking, when did I feel this feeling for the first time as a child? And then that can give you some tips into how that possibly originated for you. And the reason I say it's really important to have a lot of support around this is because obviously we all have different experiences. We have, big T traumas, small T traumas. And so especially if you're dealing with big T traumas, you need to do that with a professional. But often those childhood experiences are where these beliefs originated from. And so once you can work that out and say, okay, actually it's because of this. And because I had this particular experience, I attached as a human being a particular meaning to it. And remembering that when we're little, we're egocentric. So what that means is that we think we're at the center of the universe, not in a bad way, but it's very normal. We think that if anything, if our parents are unhappy, if things are going wrong around us, it's our fault. And so that's quite normal in children. And so once you work that out, then it's being able to change that. Well, how would a very healthy adult in my life have responded to me in that particular situation? And then being able to work through that and heal that way. So you can understand you weren't the actual problem.
Right. When we think about like relationships, and we think about like, wanting to improve for relationships or within a relationship, how like, because it's hard to like, let's say you're in a relationship or even with family members, like not necessarily a relationship with a significant other, but like, if you want to go through growth and you want to improve yourself, it's easier. Yes, it's easy to do it on your own, but I think too, like if you have and you're living with somebody else and you don't necessarily like maybe attitudes that they have, for example, like it's hard to then bring what you're working on and saying, oh, well, you need to change as well. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's maybe fair or whatever. Like, how does somebody who is listening right now wants to improve themselves, but might be, in a relationship or whatever, how do they not let their self-growth affect a relationship, if you know what I mean, or vice versa? Because like, again, I think like it's super easy for us to, if we're at home by ourselves or we're single, to want to grow. But like, again, if we're in an environment where we don't necessarily like, we're starting to realize, oh, the other person is a bit negative and that's rubbing off on me. Like it's a bit difficult and it can be a bit messy in a sense. And I'm not like, we're not giving advice to like break up with somebody or anything like that. But like, what does somebody need to do and how do they need to be thoughtful when they are going through a self journey kind of process?
Well, the reality is that relationships are incredibly triggering for us a lot of the time, but also they're the greatest opportunity for healing as well, because that interaction between you and your partner is one, you're going to have certain wounds that are going to come to the surface, and the way they respond versus how you respond can actually be incredibly healing, and you can actually grow a lot closer together. In some cases, you need more support than that, but also it comes down to your boundaries, I suppose, as a person, and what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept as well. So asking yourself that question, is this acceptable or not? And then working out what's in your control, because their behavior is not in your control and your behavior is not conditional on their behavior either. So it's actually about accountability for yourself. And if you are in a relationship where the other person is not taking any accountability, then you've got to also question, whether that's aligned with your values and that sort of stuff. So I guess more questions come up at that point.
When we're talking about like becoming the better version of who we want to be, etc., what is the role of like habits, language, self-talk, that kind of stuff? Like, I know, again, practice makes perfect. The more that we do things, the better things become a habit, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to like habits and language, what is the importance of those kind of things? And what kind of like things do we need to be telling ourselves language-wise, for example? Like, does it always need to be so positive, or can, let's say, negative language sometimes be positive? Like, let's say, let's say somebody is thinking that they're too quiet, for example, and they're quite negative about that thing. I think sometimes that, in my mindset, sometimes some people can take that as motivation, if you know what I mean. So like, does language always need to be positive, or does that negative language sometimes help?
I think language needs to be honest and truthful. I think that's more important, because otherwise, if it's something called toxic positivity, where we just
Right.
tell ourselves to be positive all the time, and it's not effective at all. It's not authentic either, and effectively it comes down to just avoiding emotions again. So it's that same trap again that we get into. So again, the healing is through feeling it and through acknowledging the reality of it, and then remembering that failure and these setbacks and hurdles are our greatest teachers. They do accelerate our growth if we choose to view them in that way. That's that real fixed versus a growth mindset as well. And things like meaning making. So that's a well-being skill, which talks about, when you've gone through something like an adversity or something really tough, a lot of the times people can draw a lot of meaning from that, and that can actually grow, and not only grow, but it can reinforce your personal strengths as well. So there's a lot of beauty in adversity and difficult situations that happen as well, if we choose to view them in that way.
Yeah. When it comes to, let's say, practicing this language or practicing these things, I think journaling is quite common these days. Like, people love to journal. And I think one thing, like, I've journaled quite a lot throughout my last couple of years. But one thing that I find is a lot of the questions are quite similar, but also, like, to me, I'm like, well, if you're seeing a professional, you might get a question or a way or a tool that's quite specific to you, if you know what I mean. Whereas when you're going out and you're purchasing these journals, they're broad, and like everybody's purchasing and doing the same thing. So like, how good is journaling, or are there any better, I guess, strategies that people can start practicing at home? Because journaling is quite popular these days, but is it actually an effective tool to help work through these things and work through the things that we actually need to get through? Or what's the whole idea of that?
I mean, I think journaling is a great tool, but it's how it's used, like with everything else. Because journaling can also become a way to ruminate. So ruminate is where you're kind of thinking over the same thought again and again. It comes from like cows chewing on the same piece of grass. So that's not a very helpful strategy. Also, what we know, if you're using journaling to worry more, for example, the more you worry, the more worries you create. So that's not a helpful strategy in that sense. So it's how it's being used. And so if you're using it to identify some of your limiting beliefs, for example, and then challenging those beliefs in a really helpful and caring way, or if you're using it to connect with that sense of self-compassion, that healthy adult self, then I think that can be really helpful too. So it depends how it's being used.
Right. How do we protect ourselves, but without like putting ourselves in bubble wrap? Because like, I think it is important to protect ourselves emotionally as well. But I think sometimes we can put up these walls and protect ourselves too much. And again, like, wrap ourselves in bubble wrap. Maybe if it's after a trauma or through lived experiences or whatever. But like, how do we, like, do we need to A, protect ourselves, and B, like, how do we do it in a proper way that we're still open to other people and to things without, again, wrapping ourselves in bubble wrap and never putting ourselves in situations?
So it's again questioning where that comes from, and where is that a fear, for example? Where does that fear originate from? If you're able to connect with that fear and speak from that part, what would it say to you? So really taking the time to get to know that part of you, not to like reject it or anything like that, because again, it's communicating something very important, and often that's bringing a lot of I guess wounds to the surface, but also these opportunities for growth and healing every time that happens. And so it's questioning that, and then just remembering that we are primed to keep ourselves alive, but also to seek out familiarity. So we would what's the quote? We as human beings, we prefer the certainty of misery over the misery of uncertainty. So uncertainty for humans is very, very hard. So it's, again, being able to notice that coming up for you, and then giving things a go and reinforcing that you're only going to get better through practice. You're only going to get better through failing at times. Some of the most successful people in the world have failed multiple times and sometimes in very public ways. And now they're thriving. Of course, it took a while to get through that healing, but it's definitely a part of it as well. So you just don't grow through comfort. You grow in your stretch. You want to be stretched, not just comfortable all the time, because otherwise you stay the same.
Yeah. What about the word no? A common theme that's coming up in the past is yes, it's important to say the word no because it protects us, it protects our peace, but also like we don't owe other people anything. But I think too sometimes like if we say no too much, then it can also be a bit negative as well, right? So like how do we protect ourselves and say no to people and be okay with saying no, but also like not letting it get out of hand, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think it's around coming back down to your values and the life that you want to live. And you can ask yourself, well, when I say no, is that getting me closer to the life that I want to live or further away from the life that I want to live? So that's a question that you can always ask yourself, towards or away, my dream life. So questioning that all the time. Through journaling, maybe talking to a friend as well and asking for that honest feedback from someone that you care about too.
Yeah. How do we set, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, like setting the boundaries in relationships and stuff like that. How do we set boundaries for ourselves and recognize what our boundaries are?
I think it's working out, if you're about to say no to something, if you're overworked, for example, and you've got this tendency to always do more and to always take it on, picking up on that anxiety that comes up, that's a real, that's a bit of a tip, I guess, for anybody when you're starting to feel like that, when you're feeling more anxious, more tight in your body, that's an indication that it could be a bit of a coping strategy that you developed when you were younger, for example. And then, unfortunately, look, setting boundaries is hard because once you start doing it, if people are used to you doing a lot for them, some people might fall away at that point. And it's also being able to sit with that and understanding that the people that respect your boundaries are going to come along with you as you grow and as you change and expand as a human. And some people might not. And that's a very bit of pill to swallow, I think, for a lot of us.
That can be quite hard, I think, like especially if you lose, maybe friendships that have been there for years or whatever. I think too, like in social media, a theme that also comes up is manifestation, like especially at the beginning of the year or whatever, like we want to manifest this or that to happen. Is there some truth behind like manifestation, or how does that work?
There's a lot of truth behind manifestation in terms of how our brain works and that negativity bias and priming our brain to pick up on, good things rather than negative things. So it's again through neuroplasticity. So there is a lot of evidence base for that in terms of behavior change. What's different, I think, in the manifestation world is the spiritual belief. And to me, that's a personal belief system, and that's not necessarily evidence-based as such. There is a lot of evidence-based to the benefit of spirituality, if you have those practices, absolutely. But in terms of what you believe in angel numbers and all those sorts of things, that's a personal belief system.
Right. Okay. When somebody is like, going through these steps and again, they want to work with a more professional, where can people go to, I guess, seek somebody that's like not registered, but somebody that's best for them? Because like I think too, it's hard to find a therapist or a coach or somebody. Like, is it okay for people to bounce through different people, work with multiple people? Like, how does that all work when people want to get started with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think I've had different coaches for different points in time, like when I was competing, for example, versus before that I had, and I found that very, very helpful depending on where you're at with your journey. But I would look at their, websites and social media, those sorts of things, see what they're talking about, see if you resonate with that message. And then most would offer a discovery call that would be free. So I think always take the time to actually talk to them honestly and see how you feel when you're having that conversation with them, and asking them questions and seeing if you resonate. And there's never any pressure for you to, to work with those people as well. And it's also just being really mindful of the manifestation space. Like the old school manifestation rhetoric was very much around, we'll just think positive and sit in the mirror and, repeat these affirmations to yourself. And what we know about that is that sometimes if you're saying these things, but you don't believe you're worthy of these things, so you've got those core we're talking about the thoughts that are more superficial, and then the core beliefs. When your core belief does not align with that particular affirmation, for example, and you're saying it over and over again, and you're feeling that sense of resistance and discomfort come up in your body, you can actually be reinforcing that resistance by doing that. So that's a thing to be mindful of as well, and it can sometimes be an example of toxic positivity too. So it's about asking those questions, talking to a coach, and asking them what they think about that and how they practice manifestation or whatever it might be.
That's so interesting because, like, you see that all the time in movies or, on social media, just repeat the self in the mirror, blah, blah, blah. But, like, I never thought of it could be reinforcing those negative thoughts if that's still what you're attaching that to. It's, again, like you might be thinking to yourself you're practicing being positive, but yeah, it makes so much sense that you could just be reinforcing a negative thought, really. Where can people find you and work with you? Where can people go to?
Yes, I've got a social media account called @Coach Cosmina. So that's where I post everything. I'm currently in the process of doing a website as well. So that's the best way to contact me, through social media, through Instagram.
Amazing. And that'll be in the show notes for you listening. So you can definitely reach out or give Cosmina a follow. I know there's some amazing things on your Instagram there, so people can head there. But thank you for coming on. I think this was very insightful. And to the person listening, I hope that you have gotten maybe like just kind of gotten a bit of motivation to move forward. Because I think, like, again, listening in and getting little like tangible tips can seem a bit daunting and might make yourself a bit anxious when it comes to change. But I think, like, everything is possible if you just take it step at a time, really. So thank you for coming on. I think this was great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.